Good evening, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer, and I hope you're doing very well tonight. We are wondering tonight, big burning question for you. Has Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, Ragavan the Monkey King, or Ragavan Lothbrok if you prefer, has this innocuous little monkey pirate made mid-range tier 0 for the first time since before I played Modern, probably since Deathrite Shaman was legal? Well, I'm not sure. That's obviously a pretty bold claim, little clickbaity, if I'm being honest, but you know what? We've got some results to back it up. I say we as though I had anything to do with this. Credit here goes to probably the biggest Modern streamer, period, these days, AspiringSpike, who went yesterday 10-0 on stream with the list that we're going to break down here for you today. And that's pretty impressive because, you know, even though a lot of people have been playing a lot of MH2, not me, because I'm in my 7th straight 60-hour work week, which is driving me insane with a lot of other obligations outside of work. I want to play a lot of Modern Horizons 2. Really haven't had as much time anywhere near as I'd like, but I will be playing this list soon. I digress, though. So lots of people playing lots of MH2. Nevertheless, the meta, as you would expect, broad, diverse, very difficult to predict in many ways, even though you have a few archetypes you know you need to respect. Mid-range does not necessarily thrive, historically, in these very broad metas. We prefer it to be narrow. We prefer to know that our answers will line up with the vast majority of the expected decks in a given field. So 10-0, very, very impressive out of the gates with a mid-range deck in such a metagame, but that is only the beginning, my friends. Spike went on to go 4-1 in the following league, putting him to 14-1 in one day, 39-6 overall, and then another trophy after that, 44-6 overall, 19-1 today, as I'm recording this on Friday. So obvious big credit and shout out to AspiringSpike, but that is just wild and crazy, my friends. And Ragavan is really, in many ways, the linchpin of the deck, doing a little bit of everything and obviously rewarding you for being on a mid-rangey plan that is aggressively slanted. So I am so interested by this card in general and by this archetype as a whole that I thought, and also it's a really big kind of planting the flag in the ground moment for mid-range as an archetype, these types of results, that I thought it would be unbecoming if I didn't cover it very briefly, at least here for you tonight. So thank you very much for watching. Let's take a few minutes to look at this monkey mid-range list and what makes it tick, what makes it so powerful. Alright guys, so structurally is where we start, and the first thing to note is that this is a Lurrus of the Dream Den companion deck. That means, of course, you better have that curve nice and low, and you better have two things going for you. You better have a number of premier threats, specifically at the 1-drop slot, also at the 2-drop slot, to justify keeping that curve low, because, you know, mid-range decks, historically, we like to play the 3, 4, sometimes even 5-drop value bombs at the top end to reward us for all that 1-for-1 interaction in the early game. And you better have some mana sinks, or virtual mana sinks. In other words, these 1 and 2 drop threats better be able to not just efficiently occupy those slots, but also scale up into the mid and late game and get you a much bigger return on investment than a normal 1 or 2 drop threat would. Does this list have those things? Absolutely yes. And this would not have been possible at all before MH2. All of the threats in the main deck, besides Kroxa, are MH2 inclusions. We have the premier 1-drops were just handed to Rakdos Lurrus on a plate for each of Ragavan and DRC, Dragon's Rage Channeler. Prior to this, Rakdos Lurrus was not a thing because Premier 1-drops did not really exist, and Rakdos was still a really strong deck because red and black is a heck of a color combination as far as the interaction goes these days, and the high curve stuff is pretty darn good too. But now this strategy is possible as well. If you look at those 2 drops, we did mention Kroxa, we also mentioned Tourach, Dread Cantor. These 2 cards have very similar energy in that they both scale up. Well, Tourach scales up, Kroxa just is big if you can get it to stick. They both attack the opponent's hand in different ways, and they are both 2 drops on a technical level, but 4 drops or even things that are more valuable than 4-drops on a strategic level. What I mean is that you're not violating Lurrus's companion restriction whatsoever by playing them, of course, but you can literally cast Tourach for 4. So you're casting your 2-drop, you're not violating the companion restriction, but you're getting 4 mana at least worth of a threat. Kroxa, same energy, 2 up front, 4 later, and in either case, you are absolutely X for one-ing your opponent, right? If these cards are lining up at all, you are not only using your mana efficiently, scaling efficiently into the late game, you are just X for one-ing your opponent. It's very, very powerful. This is the exact type of thing that Lurrus decks need to bring to the table, and this one certainly is. Finally, 4 copies of Dauthi Voidwalker. Now, this is not a traditional mana sink in that it casts everything for free, right? So if you have mana floating around, you're not really using it. Dauthi Voidwalker doesn't help you use it. But I think by casting your opponent's gigantic bombs for free, and then even if you don't quite have anything to do with the rest of your mana, that will be okay as well. So in other words, Dauthi Voidwalker, the point here, is another 2-drop that functionally routes around this Lurrus companion restriction by giving you more value and allowing you access to higher costed threats than you would otherwise have access to. The whole point of Lurrus as a companion, my friends, is to break the restriction as much as possible while also availing yourself of that free 8th card that in turn can get you more and more cards itself if left unchecked. So needless to say, the threat suite here, backed up by Lurrus, insanely powerful stuff. Now, for a look at the interactive spells, with 7 discard spells, you will be putting an enormous amount of pressure on your opponent's hand. A deck like traditional Rock, which I'm used to playing, cannot necessarily afford in most metagames to play more than 6 targeted discard effects because they're bad top decks, right? But this archetype allows you to really profit with cards like Kroxa lava spiking the opponent, for example, from emptying the opponent's hand, and you have such overwhelming sources of card advantage, and indeed some selection with the likes of DRC, that the, potential for bad top decks is mitigated in a couple of different ways. So these remain a very powerful draw to a mid-range strategy, still arguably the most powerful draw playing Inquisition and Thoughtseize, despite how powerful everything else is. We've got 4 copies of Lightning Bolt, of course, and 3 copies of Unholy Heat. You may notice the absence of Fatal Push, which I'm not going to lie makes me a little bit nervous. I have some trepidation about that, but I'm trusting, obviously, the results and the experience here. Unholy Heat, an insanely powerful card. It does have the downfall, I suppose, of if your opponent is hating out your graveyard and profiting that way by making some of your threats worse. Of course, it's going to nerf Unholy Heat too, but right now I think is a pretty good time in the metagame for Unholy Heat over Fatal Push because the ceiling's very high, it's more flexible because it can hit Planeswalkers, and the cards that are especially Fatal Push lines up especially well against are not that much in the meta relative to just a lot of small threats that can get shocked. So I do like that a lot. 3 copies of Kolaghan's Command, of course, giving this deck a ton of flexibility, grinding power, and of course artifacts are pretty popular in the meta right now. Nothing like a top end, right? Nothing like a top end that's just so clean and beautiful. 3 copies of K Command. That goes back to the Lurrus of the Dream Den strategy, because if you have a critical mass of low curve threats, not only can you accommodate Lurrus, but you also can accommodate cards like Kolaghan's Command, whereas a deck that needed to include threats at the top end, your permanents, your Planeswalker, stuff like Liliana, Chandra, for example, in a Rakdos list, you might not be able to squeeze in all of these Kolaghan's Commands too. You might need to lean on lower curve removal that might not be as powerful. So definitely, when a Lurrus list comes together, it really, really comes together. Of course, with Mishra's Bauble, we enable Delirium for DRC. We have the Premier Lurrus engine. We even get to do a little bit of pseudo scrying with our own fetch lands. We are playing 7 of those, 3 copies of Blood Crypt, some snow-covered swamps and mountains, which I assume is in case we steal, like with Ragavan or with maybe Dauthi Voidwalker, some snow threats. We can use those as well. And then we've got some thematic synergy with the snow lands, and with Shinka, the blood-soaked keep, we also have Shizo, Death's Storehouse, these really cool legendary Kamigawa lands, and they in turn buff legendary creatures. Now, they have other use cases too that are a little bit more corner case, but for the more overt use cases, we've got 4 Ragavan, 3 Kroxa, and 2 Tourach Dread Cantor, as well as that companion Lurrus. So there's actually a lot of legends in this list, especially getting Ragavan through blockers with First Strike or Fear. That can be absolutely wondrous. And of course, 4 Black Cleave Cliffs, pretty mandatory in a list like this. 2 copies of Graven Cairns. You may know that despite being a 2-color deck here, we actually have some pretty extreme mana requirements. We have Dauthi Voidwalker requiring BB on turn 2, Tourach Dread Cantor requiring triple black to kick, and then the sideboard artifact hate of choice is Shattering Spree, which needs as much red mana as you can muster. So Graven Cairns doing a little bit of red, a little bit of black as needed. 2 copies do make me a little bit leery simply because they are non-bowing with each other. We only have 22 lands overall. There will be a non-zero number of times you lose to having, maybe not able to keep a 1-land 6 when the one is Graven Cairns, or a 2-land 7 if you're unlucky enough to draw both of them. However, again, I'm not making any criticisms here, only an observation. I think at least one is a slam dunk here. No doubt about that to me. So in the sideboard, we mentioned the Shattering Sprees. There's a 4th Unholy Heat. There's a couple copies of Alpine Moon, which are very decent in Lurrus decks, especially against big mana strategies, and also pretty darn good against Urza Saga decks right now. We've got the 8th discard effect with Thoughtseize. We've got an Unearth for grinding power, and we've got some hate for the Cascade and big mana archetypes in the form of Void Mirror, Chalice of the Void doing double duty against Cascade. I don't know if you bring it in against much else besides the free spell decks, right? Because we're so low curve ourselves. I'm not sure how I feel about that one, but I trust the meta call. And then Engineered Explosives, of course, just wondrous with Lurrus. You can see cards like Seal of Fire here as well. Nile Spellbomb, stuff like this. There's, of course, a lot of ability to customize with the Lurrus loopables that are good by themselves and great when you are grinding your opponents out with Lurrus. But having looked at the entire 75 line by line, and also considering the structure of the deck that we talked about, let's cycle back to what really put this deck on the map as a Lurrus deck anyway, and that is this 1-drop threat slot, my friends. So we've got Dragon's Rage Channeler. Now, the Ragavan itself is enough to make me want to play Rakdos. I played it in a traditional Rakdos list, and it was completely incredible. And I also, of course, thought that maybe this could be good with Lurrus, too. But when you're looking at that Lurrus, you really want to see a companion for your premier 1-drop. We've got that now with DRC. We've got some crucial card selection. This is something that Rakdos has historically lacked, to the point where it played Magmatic Channeler, which I think is a really good fit for the deck. It's a really decent card, but I think probably just kind of lower card quality on average than most cards here. But if you're looking at Blood Moon, she gets better, on and on and on. The idea here, though, is that you can even look at cards that are not necessarily as overtly powerful as Ragavan, Kroxa, Lurrus, etc., if they provide something that the deck really needs. So Dragon's Rage Channeler is not only got selection in general, but Surveil in particular, which not only gives you that selection, it also fuels cards like Kroxa, and it also fuels itself, because we have Delirium, of course, turning this into a flying 3/3, absolutely insane clock for a 1-drop that can accrue value as you just do your normal thing. And then Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. What more can be said about this card that we haven't already seen with the amount of results he's getting, and that I haven't already said in my spoiler video, saying yes, he will Jund, and he will probably do whatever else you want him to do as well. The thing to just remember here is that you can use him with such flexibility. You can play him on one as a removal bait because he's legendary, you've got 4 of them, you can play another. You can run him out trying to be as efficient as possible, both in the moment and for subsequent turns, or you can bide your time and try to dash him in at the appropriate moment. The tactical flexibility Ragavan brings you is completely insane. Ragavan can also do things like power out turn 3 kicked Tourach, the mana acceleration not to be trifled with here. We're powering out our most powerful plays ahead of curve, we're double spelling, and we're of course stealing cards from the opponent as well, accruing card advantage, and mana acceleration while pressuring the opponent. And while you've got the second wave of attack waiting in the wings with Lurrus, this is just a thing of beauty. So if you have any other ideas other than the ones I mentioned by the by in terms of cards that would be neat to try in this, let us know, because I might be playing this weekend sometime. You know, a list a lot like this anyway. I think we're doing a co-play with Patreon supporter Will, so we'll take a look at your comments as it regards that. And yeah, I just want to say that it is a pretty exciting time to be a mid-range player with stuff like this going on. What do you guys think? Is Ragavan safe in Modern? Is this card pushing the envelope a little bit too much? Is this strategy as powerful as it seems? You let me know, but either way, congrats to Spike for pioneering yet another wonderful deck. Congrats to the rest of the community who has contributed to all of our mid-range highs and lows throughout the years. And thank you very much for watching this little interlude.